Recording is on.
All right, guys, we are back with Animal Farm. Introduction. It's been 75 years since the comrades of the once and future Manor Farm first took up the anthem, Beats of England, and surprised themselves by routing out the tyrant farmer, Mr. Jones, from his holdings. 75 years since the seemingly inalterable tenets of animalism were scrawled in white paint on the side of the barn, and the enthusiastic dreamer, Snowball, strove for his short-lived utopia before running afoul of the Berkshire boar, Napoleon's autocratic and ambitions. In the decades since the publication of George Orwell's seminal work of anti-Stalinist satire, we have seen the collapse of the regime that disturbed and inspired its author, the beginning and the end of the Cold War, with all its attendant horrors, and the rise and fall of any number of would-be Napoleons, both at home and abroad. Animal Farm, once a work so controversial that it seemed unlikely to find a publisher, has served for so long and in so many school curriculums as the predominant introduction to the concept of totalitarianism that it is in danger of being perceived as trite. With Animal Farm, George Orwell, then a 42-year-old Democrat socialist known primarily for essays and journalism exploring social injustice and class inequities across Europe, hoped only to dissuade his countrymen from what he recognized as a dangerous infatuation with Joseph Stalin. It is indisputable that an author's intentions for his or her work usually don't survive publication, let alone the author's death. Nothing of Animal Farm's success during Orwell's lifetime could really augur the varied purposes it would come to serve, or the global behemoth it would quickly become. Pushing back on a critique that Orwell was too light-handed in his reproach of totalitarianism, Julian Simmons wrote, "In 100 years' time, perhaps, Animal Farm may be simply a fairy story. Today, it is a political satire with a good deal of point. That was then, and this is now." Luckily, having spent the last 7.5 decades heeding its warnings and taking its lessons to heart, we have pulled ahead of the dangers Animal Farm hinted we might one day face. As a species, we have defied Orwell's wildest expectations. Wouldn't he be thrilled to know that we no longer have need of a text that so explicitly decries authoritarianism, fear-mongering, tribalism, historical erasure, factual manipulation, and war as an engine of national pride? That Animal Farm has served its purpose and is now nothing but a fairy story, as Julian Simmons hoped. Reader, I jest. All evidence points to the fact that we're in a great deal of very familiar trouble with the whole world over. That we are so dependably managed to be, despite the existence of prophetic works like Animal Farm, should worry us to the point of despair. But this is the way of our species. Memory fades. We grow bored with the lessons of the past. We don't even have to work especially hard to blur the myths we tell ourselves that the past is not only past, but already ancient history. Things could never get as bad as they once were, because, unlike those who came before us, we are good people who know better than to let it happen again. How, then, are we to read Animal Farm circa 2020? What can we demand of a book that has outlived its own ambitions, yet whose pillars depressingly seem as relevant today as they were 3/4 of a century ago? I was raised in the former Yugoslavia in the mid 1980s, in a household and culture gripped by the distinction between indoor and outdoor talk. Understanding this was as essential to my early upbringing as table manners or the correct protocol for crossing the street. The gist was certain conversations were appropriate for public consumption, while others belonged only within the confines of the house. You were expected to use your common sense to distinguish between the two as you grew older. But your starting point was to assume that anything overheard at the dinner table qualified as indoor talk and was not to be discussed with people outside the home, that is, outdoors. You think I'm talking about politics here, reader, but I'm not. Politics were so out of bounds that I can't remember any adult ever declaring support for any candidate in my presence until we moved to America. I'm talking about simple details of daily existence. A new pencil case that might be misconstrued as a sign of increased wealth, or a sandwich that might give a nosy stranger on a train some false idea about the demographic composition of our family because one of its ingredients may or may not be a certain kind of ham. People incapable of recognizing the distinction between indoor and outdoor talk, people who might volunteer a little too eagerly the outcome of some private development or some holiday plan, or, the worst of all sins, the affairs of some mutual acquaintance, were to be regarded with disdain and suspicion. For if they didn't value the sanctity of their own indoor talk, imagine the damage they could inflict if they somehow got a hold of yours. The logic of all this was unimpeachable. A person who did not know your business could not be coerced into revealing it to some sinister inquisitor. I can hear you laughing, reader, at this quaint Balkan paranoia, but it wasn't a laughing matter. It still isn't. I have been living in America for 23 years and still have a hair trigger where indoor talk is concerned. To this day, if new acquaintances volunteer information about their spouse, job, finances, health, or personal history on a schedule I perceive to be too fast moving for our relationship, I start to view them as liabilities. This reflex will be with me forever. I suspect, probably hardwired in some remote twist of trauma blitz DNA inherent in people worn down by centuries of imperialism and political volatility. Even those of us who exalted Joseph Broz Tito's defiance of Stalin and rejection of Soviet values did not live under the private delusion that government, regardless of who sat in power, was a benevolent force. We feared surveillance, police, and the covetous gaze of our big mouthed neighbors. We weren't cowards, of course. Injustices against others were always good cause for uproar, but injustices against oneself were to be borne with gritted teeth, lest the price of speaking up be levied against one's nearest and dearest, and so that one might weather whatever calamity had most recently insinuated itself upon her. Leave notions like justice and equality to the naive Americans and Western Europeans. History had taught us better than to believe in fairy tales. Perhaps that's why, when I did eventually read Animal Farm sometime in 1997, no doubt, in a suburb of Atlanta, where my mother and I eventually wound up after spending most of the Yugoslav wars in Cyprus and Egypt, the character with whom I felt the most kinship was Benjamin the donkey. Sure, the worried mare, Clover, had a kind of aspirational maternity, and there was something refreshingly single minded about Molly, the little horse who throws in with the enemy in exchange for sugar and ribbons. I was heartbroken by the heavily foreshadowed death of Boxer, the horse, who seemed to stand for so much of what was good and true. But all I really cared about was whether his little donkey friend would successfully dodge a similar fate. Benjamin is Boxer's closest companion, a cynic of uncertain age. He is known for having outlived all his peers by keeping steadfastly silent. Animal Farm scholars have often cast him as the allegorical stand in for Russia's disillusioned older generation. As weary of the revolution as they were of the terrorist society it dismantled. And indeed, in his keep it close to the vest reticence, I recognized many of my grandparents' tendencies: an obsession with common sense, a potent distrust of propaganda, a tendency to eye roll at naive, and above all, a really keen sense of the difference between indoor and outdoor talk. Benjamin is a survivor, numb to surprise and disappointment alike. He relies on silence to weather the darkest days of Napoleon's reign. Even as he weathered the darkest days of Mr. Jones's, donkeys live a long time, he often reminded us, and none of you has ever seen a dead donkey. Benjamin's preoccupation with staving off his own mortality is understandable. After all, what rules us more firmly than the urge to survive? And if his reluctance to spell out the obvious signs of ruin for his more gullible barnyard compatriots seems a little selfish, at least I can be sure he would be similarly disinclined to share their indoor talk with pigs or dogs or anyone who could weaponize against them. The precarious web of silence comes crashing down when his dear friend Boxer is carted off to Willingdon after succumbing to labor and age. Though Squealer persuades the other animals that Boxer is, of course, bound only for the animal hospital to receive care, Benjamin finally breaks with precedent to tell them the terrible truth he has always been literate enough to know. The van taking Boxer away bears the insignia of the dreaded knacker, and Boxer is going to his doom, his tired old body sold off so the pigs, having secretly revised one of the founding tenets of animalism, can get their trotters on some more booze. Perhaps because I conflated Orwell's novella with its marginally more hopeful 1954 cartoon adaptation, or because my young mind threw up some wall to forget the sheer of horror of all this, I spent many years falsely remembering that Boxer's fate marks a turning point for the animals and pulls back the curtain on their porcine overlords. But not so, it turns out. With the death of what is arguably the book's most beloved character, Orwell shows us the futility of Benjamin's revelation. It is too late for fraternal duty to override self preservation. The old donkey has kept vital knowledge to himself for far too long, and the tide of manipulation can no longer be turned. Squalor scolds the animals for spreading the unfounded rumor that the Boxer has gone to the knackers, and once they have accepted the little porker's explanation, Benjamin, like Old Man River, goes back to knowing something but saying nothing. Rereading Animal Farm earlier this month, I found myself searching for evidence of the indoor talk that I remembered spurring the animals to action after Boxer's death. It is certainly implied to have taken place. The vibe on the farm is no longer the same. Things get grim and quickly. The weight of hopelessness is absolute. In my false memory, most of the animals grow to share Benjamin's awareness of this predicament. But what I found in the pages of Orwell's novella was a barnyard full of blithe subscribers to Squealer's propaganda, or workers too exhausted by the regime's demands to find the energy to contemplate resistance. I then found myself asking, is it possible that Orwell really thought his characters were so utterly unaware of what was happening to them? The answer, I think, lies in a basic craft question that always seems to raise its head between the second and third draft of any piece of writing. For whom was this written? In his essay, Why I Write, Orwell attributes his anti-authoritarian political and literary persuasions in part to what he learned about empire while serving with the Indian Imperial Police in Burma. He was no stranger to mortal terror. Still, his intended audience for Animal Farm was not the Russian proletariat, but a Western intelligentsia dangerously enamored of Stalin. One could not have a better example of the moral and emotional shallowness of our time, he wrote in 1941, than the fact that we are now all more or less pro-Stalin. The disgusting murder is temporarily on our side, or so the purges, etc., are suddenly forgotten. Because Orwell's priority is to efficiently demonstrate how autocrats seize power, he fastens Animal Farm's narrative arc to events rather than emotions, to chronology rather than empathy. He shows us a sequence of plot points whereby a revolution succeeds, makes a genuine attempt at a social betterment, and is eventually corrupted. But, with the exception of a single scene of slaughter, he dwells neither on the forgotten Stalinist purges nor the steady violence and volatility that brings a population to heel. In 1946, perhaps such a detailing was unnecessary. His intended audience, after all, was of its own time and aware of the discourse dominating its own historical moment. Perhaps they didn't need to see the growing fear, the exhaustion, the relentless calculations of survival that wear a society down to complacency in its own oppression, all laid out right there on the page. Perhaps it was enough to write that the animals are uneasy when they see their comrades fatally confessing to allegiance with their banished snowball, uneasy when their memories of the Battle of the Cowshed are called into question. But 75 years later, Orwell's shortcut gives future audiences room enough to distance themselves from the eternal message of his work. No society is inherently safe from these horrors. The notion that Western countries are clever and strong enough to both recognize and resist the grip of totalitarianism is a dangerous myth, a fairy story, if you will, one to which we are ironically susceptible because being shaped by Animal Farm deludes us into thinking we are sufficiently armed. We already know what we need to know, we might say. We all know that individuality is a form of resistance, and that anyone who hungrily pursues power is probably unworthy of attaining it. And, as we are surely beyond Orwell's starting premise, that many of the farm's animals are naturally susceptible to manipulation and the cult of personality, we might let ourselves believe that his message no longer applies to us. But the moral and emotional shallowness Orwell derided in his time has not dissipated. And of all the things Animal Farm has taught us as a matter of course, perhaps the most important to reflect on in this new, baffling century is how the animals outdoor talk. Openly, encouraged in the debating society Snowball once sought to build, turns first to indoor talk before becoming no talk at all. Here's some formerly indoor talk. Too many of us take our freedoms for granted. Even now, those of us who never grew up fearing the dangers of indoor talk are far too cozy in the belief that we are safe from the forces that could plunge us back into a world that demands it. Animal Farm asks us to work against the delusion all the time. The survivors of Stalinist Russia may have used silence to endure, as Benjamin did, but times have changed, and the only way forward is to ensure that all our talk is had outdoors. We are making great strides in this direction already. Most of the meaningful cultural changes that have shaped our society in the early decades of this new century are owed to our increasing willingness to blur the line between outdoor and indoor talk. In opening up about the persistent daily injustices that shape life, micro and macro aggressions, racial profiling, police brutality, exploitation of body and mind, intolerance, erasure, assault, exclusion, even the most disenfranchised among us have found themselves wielding, if even for a moment, sudden and unprecedented power to enact change that once took a lifetime. Despite its many, many flaws, the internet, whose worst effects on our species remain to be seen, and will probably necessitate many more essays on how to read not only Animal Farm, but 1984 as well, has ushered in a generation increasingly baffled by the concept of indoor talk, a generation constituently opposed to certain kinds of silence. There are drawbacks to that, of course. Our species is becoming distracted, unimaginative, narcissistic. Our attention spans are short, and the change wrought by our outrage is sometimes arbitrary. Anonymity seems to compel incredible cruelty in some of us. The worst among us, nostalgia for the horrors of yesteryear, and maddened by the loss of power and relevance, are called into horrific kinship. But at our best, we are able to stand with and for one another like never before. We celebrate one another's rights to individuality, expression, faith, and love. And we might yet prove that surveillance is an increasingly futile weapon against a society that so freely, compulsively, and often foolishly self reports every detail of its existence to the point of madness. Yes, but also in a great and constant chorus that shows occasional glimmers of true camaraderie, true force in numbers, and that, I think, might be worth all the bad, at least for now. Perhaps this, too, is a fairy tale, and, like most, will let us down in ways we can't imagine. But the least we can hope is that it leaves it in its wake a society incapable of old silences. We have a quarter century to test Julian Simmons' hopeful prediction and usher Animal Farm into the niche of fairy tales. I am not sure even that is time enough. It's entirely possible that we will never live in a world free of Napoleons and the squealers who prop them up, that we will always be at the mercy of dogs raised in proximity to power and hand reared on the red meat of ignorance, that we will always find ourselves peering through windows, unable to tell the difference between the people who claim to be serving our interests and the enemies to whom they have betrayed. But it's also possible that we will never be isolated enough to keep signs of danger to ourselves as we once did, that we will openly decry every change to our commandments and insist on reiterating the history we know to be true, however terrible its contents. It is possible that we will recognize, without the blinders of squealers, proper perspective, that danger to one is danger to all, that we will read the knacker's signage aloud for all to hear before it's too late. Tia O'Bright, Animal Farm. Chapter 1. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had knocked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. With the ring of light from his lantern dancing from side to side, he lurched across the yard, kicked off his boots at the back door, drew himself a last glass of beer from the barrel in the scullery, and made his way to bed, where Mrs. Jones was already snoring. As soon as the light in the bedroom went out, there was a stirring and a fluttering all through the farm buildings. Word had gone round during the day that old Major, the prize middle white boar, had had a strange dream on the previous night and wished to communicate it to the other animals. It had been agreed that they should all meet in the big barn as soon as Mr. Jones was safely out of the way. Old Major, so he was always called, though the name under which he had been exhibited was Willingdon Beauty, was so highly regarded on the farm that everyone was quite ready to lose an hour's sleep in order to hear what he had to say. At one end of the big barn, on a sort of raised platform, Major was already ensconced on his bed of straw, under a lantern which hung from a beam. He was 12 years old and had lately grown rather stout, but he was still a majestic-looking pig, with a wise and benevolent appearance in spite of the fact that his tushes had never been cut. Before long, the other animals began to arrive and make themselves comfortable after their different fashions. First came the three dogs, Bluebell, Jessie, and Pincher, and then the pigs, who settled down in the straw immediately in front of the platform. The hens perched themselves on the window sills. The pigeons fluttered up to the rafters. The sheep and cows lay down behind the pigs and began to chew the cud. The two cart horses, Boxer and Clover, came in together, walking very slowly and setting down their vast hairy hoofs with great care lest there should be some small animal concealed in the straw. Clover was a stout, motherly mare approaching middle life, who had never quite got her figure back after her fourth foal. Boxer was an enormous beast, nearing 18 hands high, and as strong as any two ordinary horses put together. A white stripe down his nose gave him a somewhat stupid appearance, and in fact, he was not of first-rate intelligence, but he was universally respected for his steadiness of character and tremendous powers of work. After the horses came Muriel, the white goat, and Benjamin, the donkey. Benjamin was the oldest animal on the farm and the worst tempered. He seldom talked, and when he did, it was usually to make some cynical remark. For instance, he would say that God had given him a tail to keep the flies off, but that he would sooner have had no tail and no flies. Alone among the animals on the farm, he never laughed. If asked why, he would say that he saw nothing to laugh at. Nevertheless, without openly admitting it, he was devoted to Boxer. The two of them usually spent their Sundays together in the small paddock beyond the orchard, grazing side by side and never speaking. The two horses had just laid down when a brood of ducklings, which had lost their mother, filed into the barn, cheeping feebly and wandering from side to side to find some place where they could not be trodden on. Clover made a sort of wall round them with her great foreleg, and the ducklings nestled down inside it and promptly fell asleep. At the last moment, Molly, the foolish, pretty white mare who drew Mr. Jones's trap, came mincing daintily in, at a lump of sugar. She took a place near the front and began flirting with her white mane, hoping to draw attention to the red ribbons it was plaited with. Last of all came the cat, who looked round as usual for the warmest place, and finally squeezed herself in between Boxer and Clover. There she purred contentedly throughout Major's speech without listening to a word of what he was saying. All the animals were now present except Moses, the tame raven who slept on a perch behind the back door. When Major saw that they had all made themselves comfortable and were waiting attentively, he cleared his throat and began. Comrades, you have heard already about the strange dream that I had last night, but I will come to the dream later. I have something else to say first. I do not think, comrades, that I shall be with you for many months longer, and before I die, I feel it my duty to pass on to you such wisdom as I have acquired. I have had a long life. I have had much time for thought as I lay alone in my stall, and I think I may say that I understand the nature of life on this earth as well as any animal now living. It is about this that I wish to speak to you. Now, comrades, what is the nature of this life of ours? Let us face it. Our lives are miserable, laborious, and short. We are born. We are given just so much food as we will keep the breath in our bodies, and those of us who are capable of it are forced to work to the last atom of our strength. And the very instant that our usefulness has come to an end, we are slaughtered with hideous cruelty. No animal in England knows the meaning of happiness or leisure after he is a year old. No animal in England is free. The life of an animal is misery and slavery. That is the plain truth. But is this simply part of the order of nature? Is it because this land of ours is so poor that it cannot afford a decent life to those who dwell upon it? No, comrades, 1,000 times no. The soil of England is fertile. Its climate is good. It is capable of affording food in abundance to an enormously greater number of animals than now inhabit it. This single farm of ours would support a dozen horses, 20 cows, hundreds of sheep, and all of them living in a comfort and a dignity that are now almost beyond our imagining. Why, then, do we continue in the miserable condition? Because nearly the whole of the produce of our labor is stolen from us by human beings. There, comrades, is the answer to all our problems. It is summed up in a single word: man. Man is the only real enemy we have. Remove man from the scene, and the root cause of hunger and overwork is abolished forever. Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk. He does not lay eggs. He is too weak to pull the plow. He cannot run fast enough to catch rabbits. Yet he is lord of all the animals. He sets them to work. He gives back to them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving, and the rest he keeps for himself. Our labor tills the soil, our dung fertilizes it, and yet there is not one of us that owns more than his bare skin. You cows that I see before me, how many thousands of gallons of milk have you given during this last year? And what has happened to that milk, which should have been breeding up sturdy calves? Every drop of it has gone down the throats of our enemies. And you hens, how many eggs have you laid in the last year? And how many of those eggs ever hatched into chickens? The rest have all gone to market to bring in money for Jones and his men. And you, Clover, where are those 4 fowls you bore, who should have been the support and pleasure of your old age? Each was sold at a year old. You will never see one of them again. In return for your 4 confinements and all your labor in the fields, what have you ever had except your bare rations and a stall? And even the miserable lives we lead are not allowed to reach their natural span. For myself, I do not grumble, for I am one of the lucky ones. I am 12 years old and have had over 400 children. Such is the natural life of a pig, but no animal escapes the cruel knife in the end. You young porkers who are sitting in front of me, every one of you will scream your lives out at the block within a year. To that horror we must all come: cows, pigs, hens, sheep, everyone. Even the horses and the dogs have no better fate. You, boxer, the very day that those great muscles of yours lose their power, Jones will sell you to the knacker, who will cut your throat and boil you down for the foxhounds. As for the dogs, when they grow old and toothless, Jones ties a brick round their necks and drowns them in the nearest pond. It is not crystal clear, then, comrades, that all the evils of this life of ours spring from the tyranny of human beings? Only get rid of man, and the produce of our labor would be our own. Almost overnight, we could become rich and free. What then must we do? Why work night and day, body and soul, for the overthrow of the human race? That is my message to you, comrades. Rebellion. I do not know when that rebellion will come. It might be in a week or in 100 years. But I know, as surely as I see this straw beneath my feet, that sooner or later justice will be done. Fix your eyes on that, comrades, throughout the short remainder of your lives, and above all, pass on this message of mine to those who come after you, so that future generations shall carry on the struggle until it is victorious. And remember, comrades, your resolution must never fail. No argument must lead you astray. Never listen to what they tell you, that man and the animals have a common interest, that the prosperity of the one is the prosperity of the others. It is all lies. Man serves the interest of no creature except himself. And among us, let there be perfect unity, perfect comradeship in the struggle. All men are enemies, all animals are comrades. At this moment, there was a tremendous uproar. While Major was speaking, 4 large rats had crept out of their holes and were sitting on their hindquarters listening to him. The dogs had suddenly caught sight of them, and it was only by a swift dash for their holes that the rats saved their lives. Major raised his trotter for silence. Comrades, he said, here is a point that must be settled. The wild creatures, such as rats and rabbits, are they our friends or our enemies? Let us put it to the vote. I propose this question to the meeting. Are rats comrades? The vote was taken at once, and it was agreed by an overwhelming majority that rats were comrades. There were only 4 descendants, the 3 dogs and the cat, who was afterwards discovered to have voted on both sides. Major continued, I have little more to say. I merely repeat, remember always your duty of enmity towards man and all his ways. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. And remember also that in fighting against man, we must not come to resemble him. Even when you have conquered him, do not adopt his vices. No animal must ever live in a house or sleep in a bed or wear clothes or drink alcohol or smoke tobacco or touch money or engage in trade. All the habits of man are evil, and above all, no animal must ever tyrannize over his own kind. Weak or strong, clever or simple, we are all brothers. No animal must ever kill any other animal. All animals are equal. And now, comrades, I will tell you about my dream of last night. I cannot describe that dream to you. It was a dream of the earth, as it will be when man has vanished. But it reminded me of something that I had long forgotten. Many years ago, when I was a little pig, my mother and the other sows used to sing an old song of which they knew only the tune and the first 3 words. I had known that tune in my infancy, but it had come back since passed out of my mind. Last night, However, it came back to me in my dream. And what is more, the words of the song also came back, words, I am certain, which were sung by the animals of long ago and have been lost to memory for generations. I will sing you that song now, comrades. I am old and my voice is hoarse, but when I have taught you the tune, you can sing it better for yourselves. It is called Beast of England. Old Major cleared his throat and began to sing. As he had said, his voice was hoarse, but he sang well enough, and it was a stirring tune, something between Clementine and La Cucaracha. The words ran, Beast of England, beast of Ireland, beast of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time. Soon or late the day is coming, tyrant man shall be Ortherin, and the fruitful fields of England shall be trod by beasts alone. Rings shall vanish from our noses, and the harness from our back. Bit and spur shall rust forever, cruel whips no more shall crack. Riches more than mind can picture, wheat and barley, oats and hay, clover, beans, and mangel wurzels shall be ours upon that day. Bright will shine the fields of England, purer shall its waters be. Sweeter yet shall blow its breezes on the day that sets us free. For that day we all must labor, though we die before it break. Cows and horses, geese and turkeys, all must toil for freedom's sake. Beast of England, beast of Ireland, beast of every land and clime, hearken well and spread my tidings of the golden future time. The singing of this song threw the animals into the wildest excitement. Almost before Major had reached the end, they had begun singing it for themselves. Even the stupidest of them had already picked up the tune and a few of the words, and as for the clever ones, such as the pigs and dogs, they had the entire song by heart within a few minutes. And then, after a few preliminary tries, the whole farm burst out into Beast of England in tremendous unison. The cows lowed it, the dogs whined it, the sheep bleated it, the horses whinnied it, the ducks quacked it. They were so delightful with the song that they sang it right through 5 times in succession, and might have continued singing it all night if they had not been interrupted. Unfortunately, the uproar awoke Mr. Jones, who sprang out of bed, making sure that there was a fox in the yard. He seized the gun, which always stood in the corner of his bedroom, and let fly a charge of number 6 shot into the darkness. The pellets buried themselves in the wall of the barn, and the meeting broke up hurriedly. Everyone fled to his own sleeping place. The birds jumped onto their perches, the animals settled down in the straw, and the whole farm was asleep in a moment. All right, we will pick up on chapter 2 on the next reading.